as you're aware, Denathrius is a villain that everyone liked that originally was intended to have a relatively small role, but later they decided to expand his story because they liked him so much. However, we had seen that he was defeated, imprisoned, and in 9.1 he was freed. Since then, there have been no signs of him in 9.2, so what exactly is this role that they planned supposed to be? Did they save Denathrius for the next expansion? And with the role of the Scourge uncertain right now, could he escape and take control of the remnants back on Azeroth, as after all, it was his Dreadlords that had created the Lich King in the first place? Record your raids, arenas, Mythic Plus, all with Squadowy, the app that you just install, and it records itself without a click of a button. Aside from watching your friend's perspective and analyzing your performance, you can see complete encounter stats, spell visualizations, and a bunch of other things. Best of all, it can be done from anywhere, just from the web app. Check out Squadowy completely free with my link in the description. Denathrius is an interesting character to say the least. In my opinion, he may just be the only bright point in this entire expansion, as opposed to the jailer that is like an unfinished model just regurgitating generic villain lines. Denathrius is actually likable and interesting, and has a really cool and fun backstory as well as a role, at least as much as we know at this point, because a lot of things are very vague. Now, I'm not saying Denathrius is the best villain of the Warcraft universe. There is quite a bit of generic villain stuff with him as well, this entire ego, being a gentleman and seeing himself as superior to us. I honestly believe this was done purposefully and actually in quite a tasteful manner. As a matter of fact, the entire Revendreth storyline, when you really examine it from this point, was done quite well. Castle Natria, the entire draining mechanism, and even Revendreth as a concept, and us learning about Denathrius betraying everyone. Also, a bit unrelated, I'm not sure if I'm the only one that noticed this, but I feel like Revendreth, Castle Natria, and the entire surrounding area got a lot more development time than 9.1 and 9.2 combined. I mean, just look how well developed the castles are, the zones, the entire gigantic architecture, especially when you compare it to all the new stuff that was released and that is about to be released. Now, I diverge a bit from the topic, but the reason I'm talking about this is that originally, Denathrius was intended to have a relatively small role, probably in just one patch. Then, quoting Blizzard, they said that they liked him so much, the character, the voice actor, the entire role, and they decided to expand him and include him in a lot more stuff. However, it is 9.2 any day now, and thus far we have about zero info in regards to what is actually going on with Denathrius. So really, I can kind of see three scenarios that might be happening. Denathrius may play a big role in 9.2, which I doubt it honestly, because I would expect we would data mine it until this point. He could have been scrapped, which is also quite likely and would align with the fate of like half of this entire expansion. Or the last scenario may be that they're saving him for later, for the expansion after Shadowlands, which I think is also highly possible because his story was entirely left unfinished. Now, if you're confused with this entire story, you're not the only one. I'd wager even Blizzard is confused with everything as well. As we can see from the prototype Pantheon, he was created by the first ones, which we don't even know who they are, but the original batch was discarded and the new ones were created, which is, it's safe to say that he is a part of that newer batch because the original ones were fanatical. However, Denathrius played a role in the original imprisonment of Zowal, but for some reason he decided to become his most important ally, and then things got even more confusing and even more mind-boggling. See, the story is that Denathrius personally created the Ventir, then he created the Dreadlords to work as his agents, and he really cared little for the Shadowlands. His main focus was controlling the entire universe and sending his agents into various other realms to plant seeds, to plant his own agents. Well, one day that backfired, the Dreadlords caused a massive war as the Light invaded them, as you can see in Revendreth, and then he was forced to exile the Dreadlords to the planet of Natreza. However, this was a decoy as he maintained contact with the Natrazim, and then he sent them on other missions for thousands and thousands of years. As far as we know, it was Denathrius is doing this entire corruption of the Legion, infiltrating the Light again, this time successfully, and pretty much everything else the Dreadlords had done up to this point. This here is where it gets super confusing though. For some reason, all this stuff is also attributed to the jailer, and we know for example that it was him that forced Primus to create Frostmourne in the helm, but it was the Dreadlords that actually delivered it as they were infiltrated with the Legion. So our best guess at the moment is that they were very close allies. However, the question is for how long. Now that is super hard to say because we don't even know when Zowal was in prison, when all this stuff happened. The corruption of Sargeras, for example, happened well over 25,000 years ago. Was this just Denathrius' doing, or was this done under the jailer's orders? If that is the case, this would imply that this entire Maw jailer imprisonment thing is super ancient, and also a bit surprising that it took him that long to actually leave the realm, to actually escape as he did just now. However, we know for a fact in that Sylvanas cinematic that the jailer decided to abandon Denathrius, saying he served his purpose, but we also know that the Dreadlords remained loyal as they literally overwhelmed Revendreth in 9.1, infiltrated everyone, distracted us, and ultimately freed Denathrius from Remornia, the sword we trapped him in. Now, his current fate is unclear. We know, for example, Mal'Ganis is present in 9.2, but we don't know to what extent, so it seems that the Dreadlords still serve the jailer as well as Denathrius, even though this pact was seemingly broken. Was the jailer saying this stuff to Sylvanas just as a decoy to trigger her betrayal and he actually intended to save him, or did he actually abandon Denathrius? My thoughts are that Denathrius is going to turn against the jailer and maybe he never actually worked with him this entire time. All this super genius stuff that we attributed to Zowal was actually directly or indirectly done by Denathrius himself, and really Zowal is just taking all this credit. To me, honestly, it seems like Denathrius is actually the smart one, not the jailer, that he may have been playing a double game this entire time, and that he also attempted to betray Zowal and was using him for his own purpose. Honestly, it makes sense to me because after all, Denathrius is literally the one that made the Dreadlords, and the Dreadlords are super intelligent beings that corrupted Sargeras, and they're behind almost everything that happened in the cosmos, such as the creation of the Burning Legion, so it would only be logical that the guy that created them is actually smarter than them. Gotta admit, seeing that we knew this about him, it was surprising to me that this entire time that Denathrius would just blindly serve someone else. I always suspected that he was just playing a role, that he was pretending to serve the jailer. Additionally, since the start, it was clear that the Lord of Revendreth never really cared all that much about Revendreth to begin with. Since he formed the realm, he created agents so that he can infiltrate forces across the entire universe. We know he failed once, but then managed to get Ortaxian, more than likely to infiltrate the light because they said they have an agent within the light. He got pretty much every other force, even the Void, and he also started infiltrating life, which I'm guessing we will soon find out who that agent is. So obviously Denathrius just used Revendreth as a staging ground, and he has been behind much bigger things than just this one redemption realm. Then the entire escape happened, which obviously means that something bigger is intended to be done with this character. If they really just wanted to end Denathrius, they could have just left him to be trapped in Remornia, and that would just be the end of his story. Now, an interesting theory that has been going around is that since it was the Dreadlords that pretty much created the Scourge, he could reach Azeroth and take control over the remnants of the fallen undead army, so the Dreadlords would be the brains and the new officers, and the undead the bulk of this once defeated army. This way, he could either turn good and become a leader of the allied races, as I mentioned in a previous video, or he could play some sort of a role as a king of the undead in a future expansion. Many things are hinting that the cosmological war is yet to begin, this entire light versus void, and as you know, Denathrius has spawns in all these forces that he planted eons ago, so I wouldn't be surprised if he has some big role set out for him in the future. As 9.2 is almost certainly the ending of the Shadowlands and the jailer, I'd wager that they decided to save Denathrius for the next expansion, and I'd say that would actually be a great thing, as honestly, he may just be the only good thing that came out of this entire Shadowlands ordeal. Thank you for watching. Check out the ending console by clicking on the screen, and check out Doronsmovies Academy for videos on real world history. See you next time.